Texas, late summer 1945. The week the gates swung open and the radios ran out of adjectives. At Camp Barkley, the bugle you could set your watch by played the same notes it always had, but the sound felt different, as if even brass could smile. VJ Day had folded the war closed like a letter finally answered. Trucks lined up at the east motor pool, engines coughing, canvas flaps rolled high. On the whitewashed sign by the guardhouse, someone had chalked a single word in block letters big enough to see from the highway. Home. Inside the post hospital, Ward C smelled, as always, of carbolic and coffee. The windows were pushed up to their limits, letting in air that carried cedar and the distant metallic clank of victory being dismantled. Tent poles coming down, bed frames loaded, a watchtower unbolted one careful bolt at a time. A nurse moved briskly along the row of cots, checking pulses with fingers that had learned the tempo of suffering so well they could count it in their sleep. "Blood pressure's holding on Private Lang," she called, not looking up from the cuff. "Good," said the man at the next bed, his English careful and warmed by months of practice. He stood with sleeves rolled, mask neatly tied, a stethoscope around his neck that had once belonged to an American major too tired to notice when it became common property. He tapped gently at the injured boy's ribs, listening. "Breathe," he said. "Again." The nurse, Dr. Maggie Alden, to anyone who'd ever been grateful to keep a limb or a life, glanced over the tops of her glasses. "You hear that?" he asked her, eyes quick with concentration. She nodded. Lower lobe clearing. "He'll hate the coughing, but he'll love the air." The man's name was Eric Vollmer, 39. Conscript surgeon before he was a soldier. Prisoner of war by way of surrender rather than capture, and, as of this morning, a free man by any reasonable interpretation of the word. On the table by the ward chart lay a mimeographed sheet from the Provost Marshal. Repatriation convoy departs 1600 hours. A pencil tick marked his name in the margin. A runner stuck his head in the doorway. "Ma'am, they're staging the Germans at the drill field. Trucks'll start loading at 3. Maggie didn't look up. "Thank you, Private." The runner's gaze snagged on Eric's armband, the plain white strip with a red cross he'd worn since the day he agreed to swap the POW barracks for the hospital's quiet war. "Sir," the boy said, awkward with respect he hadn't expected to feel for a man in khaki that wasn't his own. "Congratulations, I guess." Eric smiled with only half his mouth. "We will save our congratulations for when Private Lang sits up and asks for pie." The runner blinked, saluted a little, and vanished. Maggie moved to the next cot. "He's not wrong," she murmured, pen scratching orders. "They're mustering your lot." "My lot," Eric repeated, tasting the words. He looked down the line of beds. 6 Americans recovering from a gasoline fire at the motor pool. 2 with pneumonia that had developed the kind of stubbornness Texans respected even when they didn't like it. 1 boy who'd come in the night with a bursting appendix and a letter to his mother tucked in his boot. In the far corner, behind a screen, a young man with a wire-rattled mind stared at nothing until Maggie spoke to him and then stared at her because she was something. At the second bed, a freckled mechanic whose forearms still carried the shadow of where his sleeves had once been. Eric adjusted the splint and retied a sling with sailor's knots he'd learned in a different country for a different purpose. The mechanic watched him with frank curiosity. "You really gonna get on that truck, Doc?" the boy asked, tone caught between dare and dread. Eric's hands paused. "It is what one does." "Hell," the boy said, softening the word to keep it inside hospital rules. "I didn't figure you for what one does." "Then perhaps I am learning," Eric said, and went back to the knot. In the hall, a metal cart squealed, an argument between axle and tile. Out by the windows, sunlight fell in diagonal planks across the floor, the dust motes drifting like exhausted confetti. At noon, Maggie called a break. The ward exhaled and then remembered it didn't know how. She poured 2 coffees into chipped white mugs and handed one to Eric. He cradled it the way a man does who remembers winters with thin coal rations. "You could go," she said finally, not looking at him. "No one would blame you." He took a cautious sip. "You do not ask if I want to go." "That's not a useful question," she said. "Not today," he nodded, the corner of his mouth tilting. "No." They stood a moment in the small oasis that coffee creates in hospital days. Through the window they could see slice after slice of camp life being folded into trucks. Mattress rolls, mess hall ladles, the felt bulletin board from the chapel with 2 leftover thumbtacks like eyes. Somewhere a band practiced. Cornet trying impatiently to win a fight with a snare drum. Maggie's voice gentled. "They'll expect you on that field." "They expected many things from me," he said, not unkindly. Then he tapped his chest once, lightly, as if telling his own body to listen. The boy with the appendix. He is still in the fog. If the fever jumps again, you'll be here to catch him, she finished. I know, he met her eyes. There were colors in them that didn't have names. The ones the war invented and couldn't put away. I will go when the war does not need me, he said, when Private Lang asks for pie. Then we better pray Mrs. Snyder baked today, Maggie said, and the joke did what jokes do. Made the air a little easier to move through. At 1400, the sky went that high blue that makes flags look brighter. Out on the drill field, a line of men formed in neat fives, armbands and camp-issue belts and cardboard suitcases that once held oranges. A white-helmeted MP checked names against a list and called cadence nobody needed. A convoy engine coughed alive, then another. At 1500, Eric was in Ward C, sleeves up, forearms corded, coaxing a reluctant lung to remember its original job. He held the stethoscope and listened with his whole face. Again, he said, softer than orders and harder than pleading. The boy coughed, winced, and then breathed, and the whisper of air in the black place told Eric the day had just tilted toward the good. At 1530, the hospital's switchboard operator shouted down the corridor, "Collision at the west gate!" Jeep and a munitions truck, and the hallway filled with motion the way a dry creek bed fills with first rain. A corpsman skidded into the ward. "Dr. Alden, I'm right behind you," Maggie said. "Eric?" He was already at the crash cart, hands steady. "Tell Sergeant Wills to hold the trucks," he said to no one in particular, and everyone in earshot. Somebody laughed, wild-nerved. "You think we can stop the army, Doc?" "Today," Eric said. "The army stops for splints." They ran. At the west gate, two vehicles kissed wrong in the dust. Steel bent where it wasn't supposed to. The munitions truck mercifully light at the hour because Providence has a good memory when it wants to. A Jeep lay on its side like a turtle. Two soldiers bled the big blood that doesn't care about flags. "Tourniquet," Eric said. German clipped down to its bones, English polished by months of midnights. "Higher." "No. Higher." He grabbed the boy's thigh above the wound and wedged his fist in the triangle of canvas and wood. "Turn." The corpsman turned. The bright red slowed. The boy's eyes rolled back toward center like planets remembering their orbit. Maggie was on the other, jaw set, hair stuck to her cheek. "Pulse thready," she said. "We need the ward." "Bring the ward," Eric said. Which would have been ridiculous if they hadn't done ridiculous all year and gotten good at it. In 10 minutes they had both boys on litters and moving. In 20, the Jeep had been righted with a grunt and a prayer. In 30, Eric had a needle in a vein nobody would have bet money on. In 45, one of the boys said, "Mama." And somebody in the hallway leaned against the wall and let out a breath that sounded like summer rain on a tin roof. At 1600, the first truck rolled past the hospital with men waving and a few joking loud for the benefit of others. Someone shouted in German, cheerful and brave. Someone else shouted back in English, the same. The second truck passed. And the third, on the fourth, a man in the front bench with an armband like Eric's searched the ward windows with his eyes the way people search train platforms in stories. He lifted his chin once, like a salute none of the rulebooks had a page for. In Ward C, Eric did not look up. He pressed the stethoscope to the mechanic's chest and listened to the storm inside break into rain and then into something like ordinary weather. He patted the bed rail once. The boy's eyelids flickered. "Pie?" he croaked. Eric smiled, the full mouth this time. "Yes," he said. "Yes." Maggie was already at the nurse's station, barking an order that ended with, "And go steal 2 slices from the mess before the colonel shows up." She turned to Eric, whose shirt clung to him in a pattern of toil she could have drawn by memory now. "You just missed your convoy," she said softly. He looked past her shoulder where the road lay, white and empty in the hard light. He looked down the row of beds where boys, his boys today, slept or grimaced or swallowed sips of water like they were negotiating with seas. He looked at his hands, then he shrugged the smallest shrug she'd ever seen. "Freedom," he said, "is not a truck." Silence took the ward for a beat, the way a good sentence takes a page. The overhead fan clacked. Out the window, the flapping corner of a canvas tarp remembered it had been a sail once. Maggie blew a tired breath out through her cheeks and smiled sideways so it wouldn't spook him. "There'll be another convoy," she said. He nodded. "When Private Lang asks for pie again, I will go." She laughed, short, grateful. "At this rate, you'll be ours till Christmas." Then, he said, "Keep the coffee hot. At 1700, the colonel did, of course, arrive. Hats, paperwork. The weary air of a man who had filled in too many boxes and watched too many men leave the lines of his lists to join the untidy world. He found them by the chart rack. "Dr. Alden," he said, hat under his elbow. "Where's the German surgeon? Sergeant says Vollmer didn't make the trucks." Ward C, Maggie said, eyes doing their best impression of innocent. He's on rounds. The colonel pinched the bridge of his nose and muttered something about chaplains teaching civil disobedience in anatomy lab. He knows he's free? Eric said gently from behind the colonel's shoulder. Yes, I have been practicing. The colonel turned. They regarded each other like men reading the same map with different compasses. The colonel opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. We can put you on tomorrow's transport. Eric nodded, polite. Tomorrow, then. Until then, the colonel said. You're, what, a volunteer? He looked faintly offended by the word's lack of paperwork. I am a doctor, Eric said. In a room with patients. The colonel stared at him, then at Maggie, then at the ward, which did what wards do best, made arguments small. He tucked his hat tighter under his arm. Carry on, he said, because the army always finds the right phrase eventually. That evening, when the heat eased and the locusts took up their rattling hymn, the rumble of trucks faded into the kind of quiet that used to live here all the time, and had been scared to come back. In the mess, 2 pieces of pie disappeared at a speed that would have alarmed the Surgeon General if he'd been a mother. In Ward C, a boy with stitches snored softly into a pillow that smelled faintly of sunlight. Eric stood by the open window, hands in his pockets, the last coffee cooling on the sill. Out beyond the fence, the road ran east and then disappeared into a horizon he had not seen from the other side since he was young. The convoy's dust had already settled. The word on the guardhouse sign still said, home. Maggie joined him, leaning her shoulder against the frame so the wood held both their tired in the same place. Tomorrow, then, she said. Tomorrow, he echoed. You afraid you'll miss it again? She asked, teasing without teeth. He considered. I am afraid some boy will ask for pie at the wrong time. She laughed low. Then I guess we'd better bake. Night came on in the slow blue way it does in August. The ward sighed, a ship in calm water. Somewhere down the corridor, somebody tuned the radio to something with a melody and a forgiveness to it. Eric traced a fingertip along the nicked paint of the windowsill and thought about the word he'd carried across continents like contraband and used whenever the language failed. Him, friend, he said under his breath. To the fan, to the road, to the 6 beds and the one behind the screen and the woman at his elbow whose hands could persuade blood to stay where it belonged. He wasn't sure which direction the word was supposed to travel anymore. Behind them, a boy rolled toward the light and murmured, Doc? Eric turned. Yes? The boy blinked, the kind of slow blink that means pain is taking a break. Thanks, he said, the whole English language in one syllable. You are welcome, Eric replied. He looked out the window one more time, toward the quiet road and the trucks he did not chase, and decided, without announcement, without ceremony, that freedom could wait its turn. Morning came slow and bright, the kind of Texas gold that made even fatigue look honest. Eric Vollmer was already awake before the bugle, washing his hands in cold water that smelled faintly of iodine and rust. The basin rippled with each movement, his reflection shaking like a man unsure of what the day would ask him to stay for. Outside, the trucks were gone. Only the empty tire tracks remained, twisting toward the highway like scars half-healed. Dr. Maggie Alden arrived with her coat slung over one shoulder, hair tied up, eyes still fighting sleep. Morning, she said, glancing around the ward. You've been here all night. He didn't answer immediately. He was checking the pulse of a soldier with pneumonia, slow but steady. I thought I would leave, he said finally. Then the fever rose. You missed the convoy again, she said softly. He smiled a little. The convoy missed me. The hospital had changed overnight. News of the convoy departure had rippled through the camp, but along with it came something else. Whispers of sickness. A flu, they said, brought in by one of the trucks from Houston. Dozens of soldiers down with fever, sore throats, and coughs that didn't sound right. By noon, the waiting room filled with men too tired to joke. Maggie moved between them like a conductor holding chaos together by will and caffeine. Eric followed behind, methodical and unhurried, carrying his old stethoscope like a relic that still remembered purpose. Temps spiking fast, Maggie muttered, checking a chart. If it spreads through the barracks, we'll be overrun by nightfall. Then we make the hospital larger, Eric said, already rolling his sleeves. Take over the mess hall. That's unauthorized, he raised an eyebrow. So was treating your prisoners. She laughed once, short, exhausted. Point taken. By evening, Ward C had overflowed. The hallways smelled of camphor. boiled sheets, and fear. Orderlies moved like ghosts, carrying basins and bandages. Outside, the sun dipped behind the towers of stacked cots erected under tents. The war had ended, but the wounded hadn't gotten the message. Eric stopped by one of the stretchers, a young corporal burning with fever. The man's dog tags glinted against his damp chest. He was muttering something between breaths. "Water," he whispered. Eric knelt beside him, holding the canteen steady. Small sips. The soldier looked up through half-lidded eyes. "You're the German doctor," he rasped. "Yes," Eric said. The soldier swallowed, then whispered, "Guess you're one of the good ones." Eric shook his head. "No," he said softly. "Just one who stayed." At midnight, Maggie found him in the supply tent, sorting vials by lamplight. His hands trembled slightly, the fatigue finally showing. "Eric," she said, "you need rest." He looked up, eyes hollow, but alive. "The disease rests enough for both of us." She stepped closer. "You can't keep this pace." He smiled. "Can't stop now. I almost feel useful." She hesitated, then reached into her pocket. "Mail came today. For you." He froze. "For me?" "It's marked Bremen." She handed it to him carefully, the envelope soft from travel. "Looks like it's been chasing your name for months." He turned it over in his hands, recognizing his brother's handwriting before he even read it. He opened it slowly, as if the paper might break. "Brother, the city stands, barely. Mother is gone. Father's heart gave out after the winter. I am all that's left. The hospitals are gone. We need doctors. If you can return, there is work for you. Come home." The words blurred for a moment as his eyes watered. He set the letter down, hands gripping the table edge. The war, it seemed, still had ways of taking what it wanted. Maggie watched quietly. "I'm sorry." He nodded once, unable to speak. Finally, he said, "Home asks, so does this place." She stepped closer. "You can't be both." "No," he agreed, "but I can be one until the other forgives me." By dawn, the flu had spread to the barracks. The army sent a telegram from Austin, temporary quarantine enacted. Civilian staff authorized to remain until containment. Eric folded the telegram carefully and tucked it beside his brother's letter. Later that day, the colonel arrived again, hat under his arm, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. "Dr. Vollmer," he said, tone flat, "your name's still on the transport list. Next convoy leaves tomorrow. You understand what that means?" "I understand it leaves without me," Eric said. The colonel frowned. "You can't stay indefinitely. The war's over." Eric glanced toward the tents full of coughing soldiers. "Not for them." The colonel rubbed his temple. "You realize what people will say? That you're hiding from your own country?" "Perhaps," Eric said softly. "Or perhaps I am hiding from the part of myself that made it possible." Maggie stepped between them, hands on her hips. "He's the only reason half this ward is breathing. You want him gone? You better be ready to bury a few of your own." The colonel sighed. "Fine, stay until the quarantine lifts, but when it's over, you're on that truck." "Of course," Eric said, though his tone made it sound like a courtesy, not a promise. 3 weeks passed. The fever broke. The tents emptied. The soldiers began to walk again, and slowly, the camp began to sound alive. Boots on gravel, laughter, even a guitar somewhere near the mess hall. But in Ward C, Eric stayed. He had become part of the furniture, the quiet hum between machines, the steady rhythm of healing. One afternoon, a nurse came running. "Dr. Alden, Private Lang collapsed in the yard." They rushed outside. The young man lay pale against the dirt, lips bluish, breath shallow. Eric knelt, pressing fingers to his pulse. "Faint," he murmured. "Too faint." He began chest compressions, counting in German under his breath. Eins, zwei, drei. His rhythm never faltered. Maggie handed him the oxygen mask. "He's been pushing himself too soon," she said. "We thought he was clear." Minutes stretched thin as string. Then, suddenly, the boy coughed. A hard, miraculous sound. His eyes fluttered open. "Doc?" he whispered. Eric leaned close. "Yes." The boy blinked. Pie? Eric laughed, a sound full of exhaustion and relief. Always pie. Maggie smiled through tears. Seems like that's your sign from heaven, Doctor. He nodded. Then perhaps heaven has good timing. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the barracks, the colonel found Eric in the ward. Quarantine's lifted, he said. Convoy leaves at dawn. Eric didn't look up from his notes. I know. You've done good work, the colonel said, almost awkward. Maybe the best. But it's time. Eric finally set the pen down. Yes, he said softly. It is time. He stood, looked down the row of cots, at the faces now asleep instead of suffering. Then he turned to Maggie. Tomorrow, he said. I go home. She forced a smile. You sure you're ready? He met her eyes. No. But perhaps home is ready for me. Late that night, long after lights out, he walked through the silent hospital one last time. Past the linen room, the surgery, the cracked window that looked out on the water tower. Every place still held echoes, laughter, shouting, prayers. He paused by a cupboard, removed his armband, folded it neatly, and placed it inside. Then he sat down at the desk and began a letter. To the Camp Barkley Hospital staff, I refused freedom once because I had patients who could not. Now they will live to take it for themselves. That is enough. If anyone asks what became of the German doctor, tell them he stayed until the last fever cooled, and then he went home. Eric Vollmer. He sealed it and left it under the ward log. Outside, the wind carried faint traces of music from the soldiers' celebration. Harmonica, laughter, and the rhythm of boots dancing on wooden floors. It sounded like a world trying to remember joy. He whispered into the dark. Tomorrow. Then he turned off the lights. Morning came quiet, too quiet for a military camp. The air was still, the flag barely moving on its pole, and the red dirt road to the main gate shimmered in the early heat. Trucks idled in the distance, exhaust curling upward in soft gray ribbons. In Ward C, the beds stood empty except for 3 recovering men and the one who still hadn't learned how to sleep anywhere but here, Dr. Eric Vollmer. He was folding the sleeves of his shirt, careful, deliberate, like a man packing not fabric but years. Maggie Alden stepped into the doorway, arms crossed, coffee in hand. Truck leaves in 30 minutes, she said. They'll hold it for you if you're late. Again. He smiled faintly. Then I should not be late. There will be no more patients to save me from punctuality. Don't be so sure, she said, leaning on the frame. This is Texas. We invent emergencies. He chuckled softly, then looked at the empty beds. Maybe that is why I stayed so long. You make chaos feel purposeful. She nodded toward his duffel. You sure you've got everything? He patted the bag. Only what fits. My letters, my mother's photograph, and the stethoscope your quartermaster still believes is missing. Consider it donated, she said. God knows you earned it. They walked together toward the gate. Along the path, men paused their work to wave or call out, Hey, Doc! Safe travels, sir! You'll write, won't you? He answered every one of them with a nod or a quiet jaw. The nicknames followed him like birds. The German medic, Doc V. The POW who fixed us all. At the motor pool, the convoy waited. Dust hung in the air, caught in sunlight like memory refusing to settle. Fred Weber, the German carpenter who had stayed behind to build the new chapel, was already on the first truck. He grinned, tipping his cap. So, he called, you finally go home? Eric smiled. So they tell me. Fred's grin softened. You built more than bones here, my friend. You built bridges. Don't forget that. As Eric climbed into the second truck, Maggie handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper. Open it later, she said. He nodded. You are coming to the send-off? I have patience, she said, but I'll hear the trucks. They shook hands. Too formal, too final. Then both gave up and hugged, awkward and human. Texas will remember you, she whispered. He smiled. Then perhaps Texas is kinder than history. The convoy rolled slowly past the hospital. On the steps stood his former patients, some in uniform, some in hospital robes. Private Lang raised a pie tin like a flag. Doctor, he shouted, you forgot dessert. Eric laughed, the sound carried by the wind. Save me a slice, he called back. The men cheered as the trucks picked up speed, dust swirling behind them like the unspooling of a long story. He opened the brown paper package once they reached the highway. Inside lay a clean white envelope marked, "For when you forget why you stayed." He opened it carefully. Inside was a letter written in Maggie's quick, looping hand. "Erich, I once asked why you didn't leave. I understand now. You didn't refuse freedom. You redefined it. If home is where the healing happens, then you've been home all along." He folded the note and placed it inside his coat pocket. Then he turned toward the window. Fields rolled by. Endless brown and green, barns half rebuilt. A sky so wide it felt like mercy itself. He whispered, "Goodbye." Not to the land, but to the version of himself who had arrived here a prisoner. 6 months later, Bremen, Germany. The city still smelled of coal dust and salt. The hospital there was a skeleton patched with tarpaulin. Erich walked its corridors quietly, passing patients who looked at him the way ghosts must look at the living. He wrote letters every week, to Maggie, to Fred, even to Private Lang, describing the slow resurrection of his homeland. Each ended with the same line. "Tell the camp the patients are many, and the work is the same." Spring 1947. A letter arrived in Texas bearing a Red Cross stamp and careful handwriting. Maggie opened it in her office. To Dr. Alden and the staff of Camp Barkley Hospital. "I am alive, and so are the men you taught me to heal. This morning, a young American nurse from Bremen handed me a shipment of supplies. She said she trained at Fort Sam Houston. I asked her if she knew what pi means to a doctor. She laughed. So perhaps your language has spread farther than your borders. Please tell Private Lang he owes me dessert." Erich Fulmer, she smiled through tears and placed the letter on the notice board beside the others. Outside, a spring breeze rustled the flag, and the bell from the rebuilt church rang across the field. The same note, still singing mercy into the Texas air.